Hello, I'm going to be showing you how I did the drawing of Professor Snape with charcoal. You can also see the shorter time-lapse version. I'm going to put the link in the description. You can see that I already had a small sketch here, and one of the things that I like to do normally is draw some of the darker areas. I do this for a number of reasons. First, I want to lay down some of the basic shapes and to establish some of these darker values, but also when you're working with charcoal, this can be useful because you can later use that charcoal you've laid down to smudge it around and add a little bit of value to the face. You can see that I also started drawing his hair a little bit. I wanted to frame his face. There are different things you can do when you're drawing here. You can leave it later, or you can draw it before you start drawing the face. Normally I like to at least start drawing the hair a little bit to frame the face, which is what I did here. And like I said, I'm just trying to draw some of these darker areas. I'm working on the left eye, or his right eye. Now again, when you're drawing here, you can either start working from light to dark, or you can work from dark to light. I tend to prefer working from dark to light, so I'm going to lay down some of the darker parts first. The darkest bit will be here where the hair meets the shoulder. Drawing darker hair with charcoal is usually pretty easy, because what you do is just lay down these lines and then you smudge them around. Now, once you start drawing them, you may feel like they're too rough and that you don't have the precision and the smoothness that you have with graphite. But actually, once you start blending that with a brush, it will look pretty good. Some of those lines and some of that texture will still be there, but it will be soft enough so that it doesn't look rough, and so that it looks a lot more realistic. So I'm just gonna draw these darkest areas, and I'm working from the top, from the bottom to the top. Here I also decided to draw the dark area under his chin to finish framing his face. And once I have all of these darker areas in place, it will be easier for me to shade and to work on achieving likeness. This area here needs to be really dark, so I'm adding some additional charcoal there. Now I'm starting to blend that with a brush, and I'm using a pretty rough bristle brush. You can see how well that blends, but occasionally you will have some of that residue. occasionally you have some of that residue which you have to blow off. But you can see how much smoother it's getting. And some of the lines we laid down are still visible. That's one of the advantages of using a brush as opposed to a blending stump, because the blending stump will tend to eliminate almost all of the lines and all of the texture and burnish the surface considerably. The brush doesn't tend to do that. I normally recommend using more than one type of blending tool. I'm going to do the other eye now. The charcoal pencil needs to be pretty sharp when I'm working on these details. And I'm using a Koh-i-Noor charcoal pencil. That's one of the pencils that I use almost all of the time, and it can be sharpened pretty well. That's one of the reasons why I like it. It holds the tip and it doesn't break as easily as some other charcoal pencils do. I'm going to finish the rest of his hair and then I'm going to start working on the face, but I'm doing the same thing I did with the other side. I'm just using the brush to blend that in. He has a middle parting, so that area in the middle will be lighter. And now I'm working on the face, and I'm just gonna suggest some of the facial features and shade very, very lightly. But I'm going to use the charcoal I laid down to spread it around to add some value to the face, and then I can work with that to give that face shape, features and volume. During some phases of this process you shouldn't panic, because sometimes the character you're drawing will lose likeness. But we can always go back in and fix some of the features. At this point there's still a couple of things I need to fix. Now I'm using Tortillon because it gives me a little bit more precision than the brush. Like I said, you should use a variety of blending tools, including your fingers as well. So I'm working a little bit to refine the features. There are still a few things to fix. His mouth, the nose, which is still a little bit too big, I think. And of course the overall appearance of the face, which needs more shading and more value to create depth. This area under the nose looks as though he has Hitler mustache, so I'm going to need to fix that. And the nose is a little bit too big and I need to fix the shape. So I'm going to work on that a little bit. Refining the appearance of the mouth and the nose. These corners of the mouth are very important. they always, sometimes people make them a little bit too light. It happens to me as well, so that also needs a little more shading. Now I'm working on the forehead. And softening some of the blending that I did with a brush. You can already see that the face is getting a realistic look. You can almost feel that the nose is protruding and that the forehead is round. I'm also using a charcoal pencil to add a little bit more of these darker areas to the hair. It looks pretty dark, but you can go a little bit darker in certain places. And just adding a tiny bit more value to the cheeks. Now, what I'm using now is a black colored pencil. And in my videos, when I'm drawing portraits especially, you'll see me using this combination a lot, using a combination of a black colored pencil and a charcoal pencil. I like using this combination because charcoal allows me to work very fast, but the black colored pencil allows for more precision and control. You can see that what I'm using now is a tapered stroke, which is a one direction tapering stroke, and I'm using cross hatching. This technique gives me a lot of control when shading and adding more value, but another additional benefit is that it allows me to add a little bit more texture to the face to make the appearance of the skin a lot more realistic and more interesting. So like I said, this tapered stroke is a way of shading that requires a little bit of patience, but it also gives you a lot of control. And it's definitely something that you need to know how to do when you're drawing portraits. And like I said, I did some cross-hatching here and there, but you can always remove those lines with a brush or a blending stump if you feel that they are too visible or that the texture is too rough. I think that the face looks pretty good now. We'll soon be moving on to the background because I think I have achieved the likeness with Professor Snape, or Alan Rickman. He's probably best known for his role of Hans Gruber in the movie Die Hard, which I watched again around Christmas, as usual, as did most people. I'm moving on to the background. So my reference photo had a background that was a little bit more complex. I decided to simplify it and just draw a dark room and some pillars. This is a masking tape, that's why I'm not drawing all the way to the edge. So I'm gonna lay down a ton of charcoal here, and I switched to a dull pencil now because the sharper one wasn't really covering as much, and I need to press a little harder to create these darker areas. And also you can see that this pencil that I'm using now is almost used up, and that's why I put it in a pencil holder, which is like an extension. It's a very useful tool when you sharpen your pencils and they get shorter, so this allows you to use them to make using them more convenient. And you can also see that once I've used up all of the pencil and I'm left with a tiny bit of lead, I tend to use that piece of lead as a charcoal stick, and it actually covers a lot of area pretty quickly. So I'm using that now. I'm using that bit that was left over to cover a large area, and you can see that it works pretty well. I'm sort of gonna want to make the background so that the corners are darker, and then as we move towards the middle, the background gets lighter. But I made this area just under that arch, under that pillar. I made it a little bit darker to suggest the shape of that pillar. But you can see that I didn't make the edge of the pillar too clean or too smooth, because I do want the background to be a little bit blurry. I don't really need much detail or precision in the background. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is a pretty messy process. So you will be working with a lot of charcoal when you're drawing darker areas. There will be a lot of leftover charcoal. Now I'm gonna move on to the clothes and the robe, and I'm gonna show you how I do this. I'm using a fairly similar approach in the sense that I'm laying down the darkest areas first, and let me just finish the hair here a little bit. So what I want to do is to try to draw some folds in the robe so that it looks realistic, so that it looks like real clothes. And the way I do that is I don't try to shade every part at first. I just draw these darker parts, darkest parts where the clothes are folding, and then later I'm gonna spread that around and draw some midtones. Okay, now you can see that it's starting to look pretty realistic, and at this point it looks like something you would see in a comic book where they have a lot of contrast and the pictures are mostly black and white with very few or no midtones. But I'm not gonna leave it like that. I'm just drawing it like that initially, but later I'm gonna be spreading that around with a brush and hopefully achieving a more realistic look. Professor Snape appears to be the most popular character in Harry Potter. It was suggested to me that I should draw him. The person who suggested Professor Snape was one of my students, and she's a great fan of Harry Potter movies and books, kind of obsessed with it. If you ask her anything about Harry Potter, you'll probably get a lot longer answer than you wanted. I myself, I'm more of a fan of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, but to each his own. almost done with the robe, and now I'm gonna move on to the sleeve of the right hand, of the right arm rather, using the same approach, drawing these darker areas. You can see how loosely I'm doing this. I don't really have to worry too much about the reference photo, but that also takes a little bit of practice until you can draw something that looks realistic without too much effort. And now, of course, I'm using the brush to blend that in. I'm trying to make the lower parts of the robe a little bit darker, and the parts that are on top around the shoulder, I'm trying to make them lighter because they're closer to the light source. But hopefully, once I've blended it in, it will look a lot more realistic. And you can always go back in with an eraser, probably a pencil eraser, to add some highlights if you want, if you feel that you need a little bit more contrast. But I think it looks pretty good as it is. So the drawing went pretty smoothly. It didn't really take that long to do. The reference photo didn't look like much initially, but it had some potential. I'm gonna move on to the left arm, sorry. And I'm gonna draw the fingers. His hand is in a fist or something. Anyway, like I said, my intention was to make the edges in the corners a little bit darker and to make the middle part of the background a little bit lighter. I don't want the middle part behind his head to be too dark. I want some contrast between his dark hair and the background. I still need the background to have some value because I want it to look like a dark room, but I do want that middle part to be a little bit lighter so that he would stand out in the foreground a little bit more. But I do need enough value around his hand here so that there will be contrast between the fingers and the background. So now I'm going to use the blending stump to shade this hand a little bit, and I'm going to try to leave the top part of the knuckles and fingers lighter, and the edge is not really clean right now. I'm going to need to clean that up a little bit. Getting kind of thirsty. Okay, I sped up this part a little bit. And now I'm using an eraser and the blending stump to clean up that edge a little bit. I need a little bit of a cleaner edge. so that we can suggest where the hand ends and the background begins. So we need a clean edge there. And I can also use that black colored pencil to add a tiny bit of texture and some detail to the hand. Now I'm just going to be shading more of the background. Now I'm going to move on to this right side and draw the pillar on the right side. Again, I'm going to need to lay down a ton of charcoal here. Like I said, the process can be a little bit messy, but it's also satisfying because with charcoal you can really cover very large areas very quickly. And it doesn't take as long to build value as it does with graphite pencils. I'm also going to be doing a ton of blending as well. And with such large areas, as you can see, your finger can probably be the best tool. Your fingers can blend really well, but they also have their limitations. That's why I'm going to be using some other stuff as well. To shade this upper right portion really dark, and you can see that I'm not really blending it very smoothly. I'm going to need to add a little bit more charcoal here and there. Now I'm using one of those bits that are left over once you use up your pencil. And I'm using that as a charcoal stick to add some more value because I want this area just a tiny bit darker. This also requires a little bit of physical effort as well. During this process you may touch some of the other areas which you've already shaded, so you may need to go back in and add a little bit more charcoal. That's just the way it is. Just adding some more charcoal, adding more value where I feel it's necessary. I want the room to be even darker. Putting down a lot of charcoal. And blending with my fingers. Blending, blending, blending. We've already done most of the background, but it still needs to be blended properly. I may not be able to do everything with a brush, so I'm going to be using some other tools. I just needed to fix the edge of that pillar a little bit to make it a little bit more straight. Now, in some of these areas, you can see some of these darker spots. So, one of the ways that you can blend charcoal more smoothly is with tortillon. and I have a tutorial on how to make those, but there is another way that you can make these areas even smoother, and I'm going to be showing you that now. You can add a little bit of white charcoal or white chalk to these areas and then gently blend them in, and what that does, it creates a nice soft gray area. You can see that this area here is a lot softer and looks to be a lot more blended in. You can just add a tiny bit of chalk or white charcoal wherever needed. This technique also has its limitations, but sometimes I find it useful. So I always have at least some white charcoal lying around. I need the person in the foreground to have more texture, and I need the background to be a little bit smoother. So now we're gonna finish the left arm. Shade the sleeve a little bit. You can see how much contrast there is between the top part of the sleeve and the lower part of the sleeve of the left hand. This range of value is very important. Now I'm going to move on to drawing the right hand. Just need to finish this area here, and I'm gonna make it darker. I don't really have much idea about what else I would put here. I'm just gonna make that area darker. Blend it with my finger. Just a little bit more onto the hand. I'm going to need to clean up its edges a little bit, and I'm going to need to try to achieve some range of value so that it looks like these knuckles are sticking out, so they're going to be lighter and the other areas are going to be a little bit darker, and the middle part of the hand that's facing us is going to be the darkest, and the lower part is not going to be the darkest. The lower part is going to be just a tiny bit lighter, because I want it to look like there's some reflected light coming from below. So you can see that the area just beneath that second knuckle looks to be the darkest, but I just need to work on some detail here and there, and to draw the wand. And once I do that, I'm just going to have to finish the background. Just a little bit more blending and shading, but the hand already looks pretty good. Now I'm going to need to finish the background here. also need to fix the wand a little bit because I've blended over it. So I'm going to fix its shape a little bit later. Again, using some white chalk to soften these areas a little bit. And we're almost done. Clean up the edge. More contrast. Okay, that's pretty much done. I'm going to draw my signature with an eraser. You can see what the finished drawing looks like. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. Like I said, the reference photo didn't look like much because it was a movie still, but I think it turned out really nice. Thank you for watching.